This episode contains specific and graphic information about a crime. Please be advised.
Someone crawled in the darkness and the bushes, was hiding in the bushes, and we didn't know, but it was Ted Bundy. I opened my eyes and I looked up next side me, and there was a dark figure, a silhouette of a man, and he was holding up his arm, and in his hand he had a piece of firewood, the same one that he had just killed Margaret and Lisa with.
Welcome to True Crime Prevention, the podcast that melds true crime with real solutions. Let's expose how all crime starts the same way, with a chance. Today, we won't give it a chance. I'm Paul DelPonte, and I work with McGruff the Crime Dog. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to cover something which, as soon as I mention the name, is going to be familiar to so many people, and that is Ted Bundy. And we have the pleasure to be talking with Kathy Rubin, a Ted Bundy survivor, one of the few who can use the word survivor from that notorious and brutal killer going back a couple decades now. So we're going to get into a lot. We're going to cover a lot. Kathy is going to tell us some things that will shed some light on the details of that. So I want to warn our listeners and viewers that we are going to talk about a real crime, one of the more horrific criminals in American history. Before we do that, I'd like to ask our folks to click like and subscribe. That really helps us out. And we're going to pause for a minute for our sponsor. And we're going to be right back with Kathy.
This episode is brought to you by me, McGruff the Crime Dog, America's favorite crime preventing canine. Check out the brand new True Crime Prevention mug by visiting the McGruff shop. It's perfect for sipping morning coffee while listening to a new episode or preventing crime in your community. 100% of the profits support crime prevention programs. Shop the mug and much more, like t-shirts, hats, or toy cars at mcgruff.org. Use code TRUECRIMEPREVENTION for 25% off. Let's take a bite out of crime together.
Well, welcome back. And we're here with Kathy Kleiner Rubin. Kathy was one of the few who were able to survive an experience with the brutal killer Ted Bundy. We're pleased that you were able to do that and joining us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So Kathy has had a very interesting life, both before the tragedy and episode with Ted Bundy, as well as after. And that's something that we talk a lot about on this podcast, how that crime isn't just a snapshot in time, but it really is something that with the victim, with the family, with the community, sometimes carries through a whole lifetime. So we're gonna unpack a lot of that. She's got a lot to say. There was a lot that happened in your life leading up to turning age 20, least of which was being diagnosed with a very serious autoimmune disease, lupus, at a younger age. So why don't you talk to us about, set the context, life growing up in all of that to the point before the encounter?
I consider myself a serial survivor. When I was 13, I was very ill and lethargic. My parents took me to the doctor, who sent me right away to a hospital in Miami, Florida. I was there for 3 months. The doctors didn't know what was killing me, and they did all the tests. So they sent me home and told my parents just to keep me comfortable. Meanwhile, there was a doctor at the hospital who thought she may know what was wrong with me, and that was juvenile lupus. It was it wasn't common at all. That's why I think the doctors missed it in the hospital. I was given experimental chemo. I lost all my hair. I'm in 7th grade and homebound, and I could look out and see the kids playing. And I knew I wanted to go out and play with them again. It was just a matter of time until I could get there. And it took a year. I'm sitting at home with no hair, no friends, and just thinking I'm going to get better. I had no doubt in my mind. So after the chemo, my hair started growing back, and I was better, and I got to go to school. And I went to high school in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was great. I joined the different classes, and no one knew me. No one remembered me, but I joined the drama class, and that was great. That was wonderful. A lot of new friends, and I learned that I could be anything and anyone I wanted to be, except that sick little kid with no hair staying at home. in my 7th grade. After high school, I decided to go to Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. I chose to go there. A lot of friends of mine from school were going there, but I found that I could go as far away as I could to Tallahassee and be away from my parents who were in Miami and so possessive of me as far as I could get and still get in-state tuition. So that was my big deal. I had to go to Florida State.
There you go. And for those not familiar with Florida, Florida State is way on the panhandle, and obviously Miami on the southern tip. And if you've never been to Florida, it is a very long state. So you were far away.
Yes.
Well, good. And so congratulations to you on that, because it sounds like while you had lupus, you made sure that lupus wasn't you, that you defined your own life, which is
right.
great.
It's in remission now, and it's not coming back. I just know it.
Good for you. Well, that's great to hear. Great to hear. And your hair looks great too. So,
Thank you.
So you're at Florida State, and that's when, right around the same time in the late 1970s, when Ted Bundy had escaped from prison and was out about committing crimes. So bring us into that, as you said, as your serial survivor, that case and that instance of what happened, where you were, friends at the time, in what life was like when that happened.
I was freshman at Florida State, and I went and pledged Chi Omega Sorority, which is when the young freshmen talk to the sisters in the different sororities, and we get together and see what sorority fits the student. So I was lucky enough to join Chi Omega, and I loved it. They had a beautiful house just off campus, and 80 of the best girls I ever met. They were all my sisters now. And I only had one sister, so this really was amazing to me. I loved being in the sorority. On January 15th, 1978, I was in my room, in my dorm, in the sorority house. On the 14th, I had a wonderful day. A friend got married, and we went to that, and then a potluck dinner afterwards. And then I went home and needed to study, because I had a calculus test on Monday, and I thought I should at least open the book and see what it might be about. So after the wedding, I went home to the sorority house, and around 10 o'clock, I started studying, and around 11:30, my roommate and I decided to go to sleep. She was also studying on her side of the room. Now, my room was on the 2nd floor. It was facing the back parking lot. The room was about the size of a regular dormitory. On each side mirrored each other. First, there was a closet, and then a desk and a dresser, and then you could see my footboard to my twin bed. In the very back of the room, when you walked in, there was a whole bank of windows, beautiful sunny windows that came bright. And we always had the curtains open because we hung flowers and pots on the curtain rods, so we couldn't close the curtains. I loved that room. It was so sunny and airy, and between our two beds was a small footlocker, a small little trunk where we kept things on top and books and stuff underneath it. So it was a great room. It was rather small. You could stand at the footlocker and kind of turn and be to my bed, and turn a little bit and be my roommate's bed on the other opposite wall. So I went in and went to bed that night.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that someone had crawled in the darkness and the bushes in the back of my room in the parking lot. And he was hiding in the bushes, and he saw sorority sisters come home and enter through the back door of the sorority house and walk right in and close the door, and the door didn't lock. So he saw this, and we didn't know, but it was Ted Bundy. Around 3 a.m, he came up to the back door. He grabbed a piece of log, a fireplace log we had stacked by the back door. He opened the door and walked in to the sorority house. The first room he walked into was the rec room. It was all dark. That's where all the sisters hung out during the day. He rounded the corner, and that was the foyer to the sorority. It was big, beautiful, bright light foyer and a beautiful wooden staircase. He walked up the staircase to the landing, and he took a right. That was the hallway with my room. He looked to the left, and there was another hallway with another 40 rooms. bedrooms. So he walked down my hallway and he opened the first door he could, and that was Margaret Bowman's room. She was beautiful, vivacious, senior, just the sweetest girl. He went, closed the door, and attacked her with that club, with that piece of wood. He also strangled her with pantyhose that he had brought with him. He then killed her, strangled her, and cut her neck and broke her neck, and her head was shattered. He closed the door. He put the sheets up over her neck so it looked like she was sleeping. He went out the door and closed it. Right across the hall was another room, and that was Lisa Levy's. He walked into that room, closed the door, and attacked Lisa with that same oak club that he had just killed Margaret with. But also, he raped her with an aerosol bottle, and he bit her. He bit her buttocks so hard that he left wonderful teeth impressions. Then he closed her door and let her to die. The next room he came to across the hall was my room, room number 8. He opened the door, and as I'm laying in my bed, I heard the bottom of the door swish against the carpet, and it kind of woke me up a little bit. I wasn't sure what it was, but I just kind of laid there. And the next thing I know is I hear a thump over that little footlocker we had between our beds. And I opened my eyes and I looked up next side me, and there was a dark figure, a silhouette of a man. And he was holding up his arm, and in his hand he had a piece of firewood, the same one that he had just killed Margaret and Lisa with. And he slammed it down on my face so hard it broke my jaw in 3 places. It cut my cheek wide open so you could see my mouth from the inside. I severed my tongue, and I had lacerations all over my face, and I promptly went unconscious. Next to my bed was my roommate, and he just turned around and he hit her again with that log, and he hit her on the face and broke her jaw and several other injuries. Now I'm back on my side and I'm starting to moan and groan, and Bundy didn't leave any live survivors. He didn't let anyone live. So he walked back to my side of the bed. Meanwhile, I'm in the smallest little ball I could make myself, because I thought if he couldn't see me, he wouldn't kill me. And I'm laying there in a ball, and I see him coming back to my side of the room. Again, his arm was lifted up over his head, and he held that log. Right then, the light shone up into our bedroom. It lit up the room. It was really bright. And as I opened my eyes after being in a little ball, I could see it was a man standing there. Then all of a sudden, he got antsy. He kind of paced back and forth. He knew he had been seen with that light. He knew I saw him, and he didn't know where the light was from, but he didn't know if someone else saw him. He ran out my door, ran out down the staircase and out of the sorority house, and went down the street to attack another co-ed. That bright light that was in my room that shone so bright then went black again, and I'm sitting in my bed, all these terrible feelings and being hurt. And that light was a car that was bringing home a sorority sister late at 3:00 in the morning from a date. And when he turned into the parking lot, those lights are the ones that shone up into my room and allowed me to be saved and allowed me not to be killed by Ted Bundy.
Wow.
Now, again,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I got chills just listening to that, and I can imagine all the thoughts going through your mind as you're recounting that ordeal. How does it feel all these years later still to talk about that?
I find it very healing. I have spoken to organizations, the police organizations, and different ones, and I heal. I heal every time I tell it. I'm actually walking through, and I walk through that door, and I see my room, and I see the carpet and the trunk and the beds, and I'm walking right through it to the point where I lay down and lay down to go to sleep until I woke up because of someone standing next to me.
And then did you, at that point in time, I'm guessing because the rooms were apart, you didn't realize that he had already killed your sisters and friends, right? That you're still not aware of all that happened at that point.
I'm in my bed still, and I am holding my face and rocking back and forth and yelling and screaming to the top of my lungs. But all I was doing was making gurgling sounds because of the blood
Blood.
that was so hot and so fresh on my face was consuming my mouth, and I couldn't actually speak. My roommate got up out of her bed and walked down into the hallway, opened the door into the hallway, and there was another sorority sister that was there. And she walked her back into our bedroom and turned on the light. And that's where they saw me covered in blood, blood on the walls, blood on my bed, and where my roommate was, blood all over her face and her bed. That's when they called 911, and the police came to the house. And still, I'm in a state of shock, and I'm hurting, and I don't know what's going on, and I don't know if this man's coming back to kill me. But this police officer stood next to me, and he kneeled down, and he said, "It's okay, honey. I'm here. You're going to be okay. I'm not going to let anyone get to you." And during all of what I was feeling, that little snippet and those seconds of him talking to me did make me feel better. I knew that he was going to take care of me and he was going to protect me. And that's something I'll never forget, what compassion he showed to me at that moment. The paramedics came and put me on the stretcher and took me into the ambulance, where I was taken to Tallahassee Memorial Hospital.
Wow. Well, certainly glad that that car came by, those lights shone. The police officer was there to provide you with the comfort and security you absolutely needed at that moment in life. Um, and glad you're here with us today.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
So you're, and this will give our listeners too, just, the, the, the amount of time that happens and the impact of this incident. And at this point, you didn't know, you're just thinking minute to minute, am I going to make it? That you're soon to be at the center of what is, a national crime scene. You're in the hospital. I assume you were there for weeks, if not months, getting better. And so tell us how things continued to unfold.
I was in the hospital only a week, because I was stabilized and they wanted me to get out of Tallahassee. They just wanted me to move on so they could do their job in pursuing whoever did this. So at the end of the week, I was taking my mom and dad and my sister, and I were going to leave the hospital to fly back to Miami. They were taking me in a black unmarked car, and they stopped in front of the sorority house. And I'm saying, I'm all bandaged, my jaw is broken, and I'm like, what are we doing here? And they said, we want to take you back upstairs to your room to see if you can find something that was missing. That if we find this person that did this, if they have it with them, that'll help put him in your room. And I didn't want to do it. And there was an officer that took an elbow each and walked me up the stairs and around the corner on the landing. And I saw yellow crime scene tape on Margaret's room at her door. And I looked and I saw yellow crime scene tape against Lisa's room. And they walked me down to my room and they moved the crime scene tape, and I got in, and there were detectives and other police officers in there. And they said, look at your desk, your dresser, and see if anything's gone. I don't even remember what was on the dresser at that point, so I wasn't able to help them. But then I looked at my desk and I looked at the footboard on my bed, and I looked at my bed. And I walked over to it, so I was standing next to it, and I saw the blood on the wall, blood on the mattress. My beautiful, beautiful bedspread I just purchased was all in a ball with the brown stains from the blood. And I stood there for a few minutes, and I looked at it, and I said, this is what happened to me, and this is where it happened. I don't have to try to remember, and I don't have to make up things that I don't remember, because this is what happened. So they took me back out to the police car, and they took us to the airport, and I flew back down to Miami.
Okay. And at this point, had they told you while you were in the hospital what happened to your friends?
No, I didn't find out till days or a week later, when I was down in Miami. When I went to Miami, like I said, my jaw was wired shut. And I still have TMJ really bad. The whole side of my cheek is numb, my lips numb. And periodically I have to have surgery again on my jaw. because it deteriorates so much. So when they took me down to Miami, I had to recuperate, but I didn't know what was going on. I heard what was going on, but my parents, my mama, had cut out all the articles from the newspaper and didn't let me watch TV and the news because she wanted me to recuperate, not relive, and understand what was going on. So during that time, I was not offered to see a therapist. Back in the 70s, it wasn't something, I guess, that was common for victims to have someone to talk to. So I became afraid. I was afraid of something behind me, something black, something that was going to capture me and wrap its cloak around me. And I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want to have this behind me all the time. So in my mind, I looked out in the ocean. Far out in the ocean, I saw a little island. And on that island was one palm tree and one sand chair. And it was a big, beautiful blue sea. And I took baby steps to get to my island because it was sunny and beautiful there. It took me days to take my little baby steps in my mind. And one day I turned around and looked, and that black mass was baby steps behind me. I finally reached my island. I sat down, I put my toes in the sand, and I looked up and I saw the sun glistening on the water. It was so pretty, and I looked around. That black mass was completely gone. It was no longer going to be a part of my life, and I walked away from it.
A beautiful metaphor for moving on. So as you're moving on, as you're each passing day, your toes deeper in the sand of the island and the masked man, the cloak behind you, further and further away. How is the case proceeding? And how
Up
long?
in Tallahassee. Up in Tallahassee, they were actually back in the 70s. We didn't have the internet, and it was not common for districts and police officers to communicate with other police officers in the country at their departments. And there was certain things that were happening in the case. There was one time where a guy would, let me back up. Kimberly Leach was a little 12-year-old girl that lived in the middle of the state of Florida. She was abducted from her school, put in a white van, and Ted Bundy was driving. He took her out into the woods to an empty pigsty, and he killed her. After he did that, he left her for dead. He then was driving out of the state of Florida, up in the Panhandle to Pensacola. There, he got stopped by a traffic violation. He was pulled over, and not knowing who he was, this officer pulled him over and told him to get out and give him his license and his registration. Well, it was a stolen car. So he said, "You have no idea who I am, and you're going to remember this." Bundy then took off running, and he ran down and into the woods, and the police officer is chasing him, and he finally catches him, and there was a struggle for his gun, but the police officers got him under control and cuffed him and took him to the Pensacola Police Department. During this time, Sheriff Ken Casares in Tallahassee was doing everything he could to try to figure out what had happened to his city, what had happened to these women. And as he was looking and saw the MO of someone coming into a house and attacking women as they slept in bed. And he found out that this was similar to a case up in Utah, in the west and top west of the United States. And he heard about someone up there, and he requested information to be sent down to Tallahassee. Now, this guy in custody didn't tell him who he was. He gave different names. He had different license on him to identify him. So finally, they took him to Tallahassee, and the information came back from Utah and fingerprints. And that's when they fingerprinted this guy, Ted Bundy, and knew who he was as Ted Bundy, but they couldn't connect him to Tallahassee. It was just his regular MO that he did that Sheriff Casares saw.
Wow. So good on Sheriff Casares for being
Yes.
a smart detective in connecting the dots. And then what made the connection to your case?
During that time, different things were happening. Like I said, Ken Casares, sheriff, was putting this together and had the information that was brought over from the other states. So, and also he had the case of little Kimberly Leach in the middle of the state. And he was putting things together and thought this was the person. but could not identify him to actually be in the sorority house. So there was a lot of detective work and a lot of things going on to try to put him there. And then they did find that he was renting a room in a little house on campus. They could trace him to that. So that's when the case got firm that it was definitely Ted Bundy that had attacked us that night.
Wow, that is incredible. It's almost hard to, and for those who uh, were not around during that time, or maybe only vaguely have heard of Ted Bundy, what you just described gives some idea of the absolute terror that he was bringing to the nation at the time. You have this serial killer at large. And then finally, the dots are starting to connect, but at this point, still not fully. I mean, it was going to take some time for this whole story to come together. So there you are. You are one of the few survivors who, because as you pointed out, he didn't leave survivors because they would be witnesses. So how did that impact you, where you were, and what would happen next?
Let me back up and let you know that Bundy was a psychopath. He had no self-esteem. He stole and pickpocketed for his change, for his clothes. He never had a real job. He never had real friends. They called him creepy. But he could function during the day as someone that acted normal and pretended he was a Republican going to run for office and was doing all this stuff to act normal. He was very manipulative. So the people saw that, but they didn't see the actual Ted Bundy, where he went and stalked women and took them out of places at night and killed them, and went into many houses at night and took women out of their beds and killed them, and took them to the woods and did horrible things to them. Bundy wanted to be in control. He wanted to feel the woman's lifeless and comatose body. He took them into the woods and he mutilated them. Some he didn't kill right away, but when he did, he would go back and wash their hair and put on makeup and revisit them over and over. This guy was a true loser. While I'm recuperating, one thing I do want to mention was I didn't know it, but everyone told me I should be afraid of men. Why aren't you afraid of men? I'm like, yeah. So when my mouth was open, unwired, I went to work at a lumber yard because I figured, where could I see the most men in the shortest amount of time to get over this thing of being afraid of them? And I worked there about 3 weeks, did the register, and each man that came by, I looked him in the face. I said, hello, how are you today? And then I made the sale, and he would walk out, and then the next guy would come to me. And again, I looked him straight in the face. And I think there was one guy that kind of freaked me out a little bit, and I slid under the register, and another cashier came and took the sale. But after about 3 weeks, I was over it. You know, I saw a lot of men, and they weren't going to hurt me. But I did learn that there are a lot of cute construction workers that work and go to lumber yards. So that was one thing that I helped. Again, with no therapy, I just worked that one out in my head and learned to be better for it.
That in and of itself is just a testimony to your resilience, and to do that at a time where therapy was uncommon and not even thought of. So congratulations again on taking that big step. So you were involved in the trial, is that correct?
Yes. In the fall of 78, I was subpoenaed to go to the deposition, and my parents and I were flown up to Tallahassee from Miami, and the police officers were with me, and they were down at my house in Miami before they knew someone had been caught, and they were across the street from my house, and they made us feel so safe, my parents and I, that no one was going to happen to us again. So I went into the upstairs to the conference room, and I opened the door. And I went in, and there's a long conference table. On one side were detectives, and the other prosecution. The other side was the defense. And I sat down at the head of the table, and I looked down, and Ted Bundy sat at the other end of the table. And I remember he had on a light blue jacket and a white shirt. And he just sat there and acted like, we're wasting his time. Let's get over this. He had nothing to say to me. It wasn't like I wanted to jump over the table and kill him, although that kind of came to thought, or I wanted to hurt him, but I just sat there and answered questions. And the defense actually made me feel bad because they were asking me if I wore real short skirts and went out to bars a lot and maybe would have encountered Bundy and asked him to dance or was doing something provocative. And I was only asleep in my bed, but they made it sound like maybe I was at fault for why Ted Bundy attacked me. So after the deposition was over, I got back into the car and they took us and flew us back to Miami.
Yeah. And what you described is not uncommon. And what we hear from a lot of survivors is you're not just a victim once, but the trial and going through that, because the defense in any assault case will try to put the victim in a bad light. Don't worry about that here, because if there's one thing McGruff the crime dog stresses, it's listen to the victim, trust the victim. And
Yes.
it is ultimately the community, people like you who survive and help the police capture someone and then help the right side of the law do justice and put these people behind bars where they belong. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
as you
The
say,
next time,
the serial survivor.
yes, I am. The next time I saw Ted Bundy was at the actual court trial date. And the jury the location of the court was changed from Tallahassee down to Miami. So this was closer to my home now. And it was the first trial that actually led TV cameras into the courtroom. And it was a circus around the town.
It was, there you are thrust into what had become, a focal point of the nation at that time. There you were, just what was going through your mind, realizing at that point when you realize this is what everybody in the country is talking about.
When I first learned that it was Ted Bundy who had attacked me, I didn't know who Ted Bundy was. I was a sophomore in college and living life and going to frat parties, and I had no idea what was going on at the West Coast of the United States. So I didn't know. And so I wasn't so much afraid because I didn't know the details of him. But the court...
I was going to say, probably at that point, probably a good thing you didn't know.
Yes. It was over the years that I've heard more and more about him and the things that he did do. But the morning the court went on, the trial, and the morning it was my time to testify. I remember I got up and had breakfast, and I found the prettiest red dress I could find in my closet and put on my white sandals and went to the courthouse ready to testify and tell my story of what happened. When I got to the courthouse, the police took me up into a conference room where I waited until it was my turn to actually testify. In that room were the paramedics who treated me that night and the police officers that were around and the one that saw me and knelt down next to me. And I gave them the biggest hugs for saving my life.
Oh my God.
And for giving me confidence that I was going to be okay.
Wow.
Then they called me in to testify, and I went up and I had to walk through the gallery, and I stood and gave testimony as I sat down in the witness. And I looked and I saw the prosecution table on one side, and I looked over and there was the defense on the other side, and Ted Bundy was sitting next to them. And again, he looked very smug, like, you're wasting my time. They're not going to catch me for this. They're never going to catch me for this. I'm too good. They can't find what I really did. And I gave my testimony. And as I looked at him, I didn't take my eyes off of him. And again, I so wanted to go and just hurt him. I didn't know how, but I just went. Of course I didn't. It was just in my thoughts. So the last question I remember the defense asking me is this the man you allegedly saw in your room that night that you allegedly said attacked you? And I looked and I had to say, I don't know, because I never saw his face. And that has hurt me so many years, that I didn't help convict him, that my testimony wasn't something that was strong enough to convict Ted Bundy. And he was found guilty and sentenced to death.
He was. And I would say that what you did do, what you were able to do, everything in a crime is a piece. And every piece fits into the bigger puzzle. So you did help. And so we thank you for that. We thank you for your courage. And your courage goes beyond this, which is just remarkable. You wrote a book, and the title of that book is A Light in the Dark. I guess going back to that light that night. But the rest of the title is Surviving More Than Ted Bundy, because life throws through other things in your way, in your path. And so tell us about the book. Tell us about what you've gone on to do and how you continue to help others to this day. And this is part of coming forward, as you say, is therapeutic. And so we're going to help you heal. Tell us more.
Thank you. I wanted to write the book for many years, and I would sit down, and during the day, my son and my husband would go to one of his baseball games. And I was sitting home thinking of what happened to me in the past and trying to write a chapter. And then I said, why am I doing this? I'm missing today and my son playing baseball. So that's kind of put away my thoughts of writing my own book. And over the years, it just didn't seem necessary. I was a single mom for 5 years. I got divorced when Mike was 2. So being a single mom and going through life, I had different challenges, of course, during the time, but I wanted Mike to have a normal life. So Bundy wasn't talked about. If he had asked any questions, I would have told him, of course, but it just was nothing that was brought up. And in 2018, I was approached by Rolling Stone, and they wrote an article by Tori Telfer, and she was great. She really told the whole story, and it was something that I thought was well written. And then Mike read it. One of his friends from college called and said, Mike, is that your mom? He goes, what? So he read the article, and he called me, and he was very emotional. He said, Mom, I knew you were hurt by someone, and I knew it was Bundy, but I didn't have all the details. And I'm so sorry I was not strong enough or stronger for you. And I said, honey, I'm the strong one for you. So we're very close because of that. But he said, I didn't know. And I'm like, I was giving you, pool parties and making you cupcakes and, doing all this kind of stuff. And that's what I wanted him to remember.
Absolutely. And that was the important job in your life at that moment. And you rose to the occasion and did it. So again, congratulations on that. And tell us a little bit more about your speaking and how you're helping others, talking to other women and more.
Another thing about writing the book, when my co-author, Emily Lucchese, came to me and we decided we're a good fit for writing the book, it took about 2.5 years to write the book because it was slow for me because I went through each thing and mentally saw it and tried to explain it to her. So this is important, but also I mentioned 30 women that Ted Bundy was accused of killing and mutilating. And like I said, he would take their bodies there and he would take their heads off. And sometimes he kept them in his refrigerator. He would cut off their limbs and put them into another county just so he wouldn't be caught as the one who did this. He was very evil. But I mentioned the women who he did kill. And I told about them. I told a little bit about each one. I gave them a little voice and what they were doing or what their dreams were. And to me, that was the important reason for writing the book, is to highlight them. Most of the times when you read a book about Bundy and his victims, it's one paragraph and it's each name, like Margaret Bowman, comma, Lisa Levy, comma, and it goes on that way. And to me, that's been so hurtful all these years because we were women. We had lives, and that was important for me to bring up and let everyone know about them.
And if you truly want to understand the mind of a criminal, you have to look at the victims, and you've got to
Yes.
and realize, as you point out through in the book, in your life, in your actions, that it is more than a sentence. It is more than a snapshot in a moment, that it is something that is a lifetime beyond that, with all the more, which makes your current work of helping others and helping prevent all the more important, because you are giving people not just preventing one incident, but you're preventing a lifetime of post-traumatic stress and reliving things and things that get in the way of the baseball games and the happier things in life.
Yes.
So thank you for giving us the full picture. Yeah.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. One thing I'd like to say for victims out there, whatever happened to them or whatever is happening to them, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that you're put into this situation, and you should never blame yourself for what happened. Another thing is I had a bright light that shone into my room that night and saved my life. And they may not have a bright light, but they can't let theirs dim. They have to know that they have to move on, and their life now needs to become their life and to enjoy the light and be happy in it. Also, people need you. The world needs you. You need to come out and not be afraid to open the door or open the shades. You need to go out and open the door, sit down outside and feel the sun on your face and just relax and look at a tree and see a leaf, a single leaf, and know that that leaf alone does not make a tree. It's everything else and all the other leaves. And as a victim, you are more than just that leaf. Everyone needs you to complete the picture. So to me, that's very important.
That is extremely important. And that is just a beautiful thought and sentiment as we wrap things up here. And thank you for sharing all that. And thank you for giving that perspective, because that really gets to why at the National Crime Prevention Council, we encourage and work to protect victims because of all those connections. And thank you for being a hero. Thank you for standing up and sharing your story. Again, Kathy Kleiner Rubin, the book, A Light into the Dark, Surviving More Than Ted Bundy, is a true victim's account that gives hope. And that really, we thank you for shining the light and providing other survivors with hope.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being with us. And thank you again for joining True Crime Prevention. Don't forget to click like and subscribe, and we'll see you here again next week. Thank you.
That's an easy way to take a bite out of crime.